And you are good to go.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Hi, everybody, and welcome to the first Stimulus Fund Committee meeting. It is November 16th at 3 o'clock. I'm Andrea Hogan. I'm going to be the lead cheerleader on this one. I really want everybody to feel comfortable in this room and comfortable in this process. That's a really important thing. We're going to go around and introduce ourselves in just a minute. But first, I just want to say very quickly that the work we have before us is a once-in-a-generation opportunity. Per the rules laid out by the federal government, these funds must be used to respond to the impacts of the pandemic: medical, economic, social, and fiscal. Some of these impacts are obvious. Others will be teased out through the process we're about to undertake. This is a process wherein stakeholders from across the county will be asked to come in and provide insights and information. Think of this committee as a conduit. We are not here to generate proposals, and nor will we ultimately decide how these funds are to be spent. That will be the full Board of Supervisors. Our job is to receive information, filter it through a complex system of regulations laid out by the federal government, synthesize it all into a plan, and make recommendations. These meetings are not public hearings. They are a time for a working group to come together, listen, and process. The steps we'll follow will be methodical, transparent, and thoughtful. To that end, we've engaged the considerable talents of the Warren County Planning Department, and they're going to help guide us through some of this. Before we get into the description of the process, though, I'd like to go around the room and ask everybody to introduce themselves. We'll start with Ethan.
Ethan Gaddy, the Assistant County Planner with Wayne here.
Craig Leggett, Supervisor, Town of Chester.
Thanks for being with us today, Craig.
Michael Biddle, President of the Adirondack Regional Chamber of Commerce. Thank you for having me.
Rachel Sieber, I'm a Queensberry Supervisor at Large and Chairwoman of the Board, and I'm so excited to be here today and to have this very moment as we really start to conceptualize what this looks like for Warren County. Thank you, Supervisor Hogan, for saying yes and for taking this on, and to the members that agreed to be part of this committee.
Mike Wild, Member Board of Supervisors representing Queensberry.
Another Queensberry Supervisor, Doug Beatty.
Frank Thomas, Town of Stony Creek Supervisor and Budget Officer.
Wayne Lamoth, Director of the County Planning Office and County Planner.
Ryan Moore. Oh, excuse me, Larry.
Larry Ullman, County Attorney.
Larry Ullman, County Attorney. Ryan Moore, County Administrator.
Thank you, guys. And we'll go to on Zoom. Beth?
Beth Gillis, Director, Lake Champlain, Lake George Regional Planning Board.
Claudia?
Claudia Bremer, Supervisor representing Glens Falls. Thank you, Chairwoman Hogan, for the time you've already put into this.
Ray, I see you there.
Hi, everybody. Ray Agnew, Vice President, Glens Falls Hospital.
Great, thank you. Thank you all for taking the time out of your busy day for this. The purpose of this task force, we kind of covered a little bit in the introduction. We're going to be allocating approximately $12 million into the following categories: responding to the public health concerns raised by the pandemic, responding to the negative impacts of the pandemic, economic impacts of the pandemic. We're going to look at putting money to services that serve disproportionately impacted communities. We're going to consider premium pay to essential workers. We'll look at improving water, sewer, and broadband infrastructure, replacing revenues lost by the county government due to the pandemic, and we'll look at allocating some administrative costs. Next, we'll talk about the schedule and the timeline. Wayne?
All right. The suggested timeline is that half of the funds are already present at the county. The other half, I believe, will come in sometime during 2022. The task of this group is to come up with a plan, a recommendation to the county as how those funds will be expensed. All those funds need to be obligated to some activity consistent with that plan by 2024. And all funds need to be expended by the end of 2026. So this is a multi-year process. So as we endeavor to look at concerns of people that stakeholders that come before us, the option is there to entertain multi-year projects or programs. So just keep that in mind. And that's really about it for that. Did you want Ethan to, Ethan, you want to hit number 4, 5, and 6?
Yeah, thank you. So, we're not the first people to do this ARPA planning process. County Administrator shared some good resources with us. I know the, New York Association of Counties has some other good resources, but there's some really good points that we should consider as we get into this process. And I know that some of you have a packet in front of you. Some of you that are remote don't have this, and hopefully we can put this online, but there's a one-page sheet here that talks about some of the guiding principles that we should be looking at as we launch this endeavor. And these are pretty common sense approaches that other communities have already done. Again, next time I think we can do a PowerPoint presentation so everyone can see the graphics that are remote. But the first step of this planning process is to prioritize good governance. Make sure that we convene a variety of stakeholders and build consensus throughout this process. The other thing is that make sure that we're actually following allowable uses under ARPA. The county administrator again has been really diligent on helping us understand what those are. So as we start thinking about project ideas, we should keep that in mind. There has to be a nexus between the impacts of the coronavirus pandemic and whatever project or program that we're going to allocate funding to. Meeting all accounting and reporting rules is pretty critical. Right now, we have the assistance of the Treasurer's Department and with the help of Wayne and I to help administer the grant and do our semi-annual reports. And again, transparency. We need to ensure transparency throughout. To that end, we have a website. We're going to be live streaming our meetings. We're going to encourage public comment at all steps of this process. So that's a fairly good way even for people that are remote to actually get access to all these deliberations. And we also want to make sure we don't create future budget deficits. So if we get into a program or a project in which, oh, this is a great idea, let's get another 10 staff. Hey, what do we do when the ARPA funds are gone? Let's try to think sustainably about this. Consider investing in best uses for long-term recovery. So what are the urgent, health and economic needs that we need to address as a county? What are some of the outstanding things? One of the other elements of sustainability of this is identifying and addressing pre-COVID inhibitors to growth. What was the county struggling with before that made us more susceptible to suffer from pandemic-related issues? So if we could identify any challenges that we had going into this pandemic and figure out strategies to address those, that would be a wise use of funds. And basically, we also need to make sure that we're leveraging our ARPA aid. There's a lot of other federal funds that have been released. Just yesterday, the president signed the federal infrastructure bill. So that's going to free up a lot of money for some of the infrastructure that is also an eligible expense through this ARPA funding. So, hey, do we want to spend it on roads, sewer, water infrastructure? All good ideas, but we need to be very careful of what other federal funds are coming down the pipeline. Because if, we do have until December 2024 to have all these funds, obligated. So as these new federal stimulus programs come out, we should be carefully monitoring to those to make sure that we're not spending ARPA funds on something that we could have otherwise had funded through a federal program. Then our hands are tied on this otherwise available federal funding. And really, we don't need to reinvent the wheel. Beth Gillis is here on the call. She's a committee member. Her group, the Lake Champlain, Lake George Regional Planning Board, just spent a considerable amount of time and resources developing a economic recovery plan for the region. And Beth, I think that was 5 counties.
Yes.
And so Beth, if I could put you on the spot for this one, through this planning process that your team did with consultants, you did a very in-depth, detailed demographic analysis, economic analysis, a lot of stakeholder engagement, which did include Warren County.
Yes, it did.
Yeah, so I would encourage anyone, even members of the public or anyone on this committee that hasn't seen that report to take a look at it. And I think, Beth, it's on your website. Even if you could share a link with everyone here, that'll take a lot of the legwork out of this process. We don't need to reinvent the wheel. And also collaboration is extremely important. What other community groups are out there that we could be, talking to that are already doing this work that we want to support? Do we need to create a whole new organization to do things that we want to do? Not necessarily. There's already people that are delivering these services. Let's piggyback with them. So that is just some basic guiding principles. Keep that in the back of your mind as we go into this process. So the fifth item on the agenda, and before we move on, did anyone have any comments on the guiding principles or key considerations? I don't know if anyone had that sheet in front of them.
Yeah, Mr. Gaddy, thank you so much. Just curious, and Mr. Lamoth made point, you said it has to be committed by December 2024. Mr. Lamoth said spent by 2026.
Yeah.
Are there percentages? I'm just curious, does there have to be a certain amount spent each year? Are there any, I didn't see anything on that. That's the only reason I'm asking. Are there any other data points, number points that we have to go off of besides that?
Right. There's nothing that I have seen identified. There's some Department of the Treasury notes. Obviously, they're going to want to see activity sooner rather than later. I mean, this is supposed to be a quick response to pandemic issues or related issues. So it would behoove us to have some short-term deliverables.
Thank you.
I think we'll probably identify some of those short-term needs as we talk to our stakeholders, and we've already heard from the survey that there are some immediate needs that need to be addressed. Okay, so the next point here, number 5, is a discussion of preliminary priorities. As a county, we need to look at this opportunity, as Supervisor Hogan has mentioned. Hey, how do we invest this money in a long-term sustainable way so that we not only take advantage of this money, that we can reap the dividends of it, 20, 30, 40, 50 years from now. That said, as a group, I think it will be really important to talk about some priorities or priority issues that we identify through public engagement, through the community survey, through discussions with stakeholders, through our own experience as elected officials, department heads, what have you. So we can use this, we can set up a list of priorities. What are the priority issues? What are the opportunities and challenges facing the county? What do we need to address? And this is sort of regardless of what the funding categories are. Take a step back and think about, what does a county need to focus on? What do we need? Who is most impacted by this pandemic? So this is going to be a work in progress. So as we look at the survey results, as we talk to stakeholders, as we look at Beth Gillis's report, and as we learn more about the impacts of the coronavirus, we should have a draft sort of working set of priorities. This will be worked on throughout this entire process. And as it gets to the point where we start making decisions or have a list of recommendations for the Board of Supervisors to approve funding for, we have to evaluate these against our long-term goals and priorities as a county. So Supervisor Moore had already sort of informally started this process about a month ago, and said, ask everyone to sort of look at look at the survey and what are your top thoughts on this? I think we'd like to formalize that a little bit more and put that list together. I don't want to put everyone on the spot here right now, but feel free to email. We can get together a list of, hey, what are the biggest issues facing the county as it relates to pandemic recovery? And from that, as we hear from other stakeholders and other members of the public, we can fine tune that list. And then when it comes time to making recommendations on the final projects and programs, we can say, hey, do these actually relate to the county's long-term goals?
I'm going to interrupt you real quick there, Ryan. Administrator Moore, did you want to to outline very quickly what some of the priorities are that we've already got listed? Do you have that handy?
I could outline it. I don't know if it'll be very quickly, though.
Yeah, yeah, and I think the important thing too will be that once we get it on paper and have it, synthesized and make it sort of accessible to everyone. That could be.
I thought it would be helpful if Ryan just went through it real quick or just hit some highlights so that people know the thought process or understand the thought process.
Sure. There is in this binder someplace, there's sort of my mind dump as I've read through all the guidance documents that have been prepared by organizations like NACO, as I've read through the actual guidance prepared by the IRS. Not the IRS, but the Treasury, I'm sorry.
It's in the last section.
It's in the last section, and it is really a mind dump. And it's every time someone tells me they have an idea for ARPA, I come back here and I put it on this list. And I mean, I could answer the question in a couple of ways, one of which would be what I see as county administrator as being initial, what I would call low-hanging fruit to go after to throw out to this committee for consideration. I just don't know if we're at that point in the discussion yet, because it's going to get quite granular.
No, but thank you for pointing us to the right section. of the notebook.
Sure.
Appreciate it.
Yeah.
Ethan, did you have more?
Yeah, I think, obviously we can work with Ryan and
Chairwoman,
others to get these.
I'm sorry to interrupt. Before Ethan goes, would you mind just reading a couple of those highlights?
I didn't get the end of that question.
I think she froze. I think she was asking to just hit some of the highlighted.
Okay, so, all right away, what I would say from my perspective as county administrator, that we have certain reimbursements to county departments that have incurred direct costs from COVID. So the criteria I would apply to that is if it ends up being a tax levy expense, obviously, which means that we don't have outside state funding or federal funding for it already. So any tax levy expenses of county departments, that these would include public health, countryside adult home, the county jail, the meal sites for the Office for the Aging, any department, frankly, that purchased personal protective equipment, anything that they did since March 3rd, 2021, which is the initial date for reimbursements for us for these types of things, for costs related to vaccinations, to COVID testing, to contact tracing, prevention in congregate settings, to personal protective equipment. And then the same prospectively, because our numbers right now, in terms of if you look at it from the volume of new cases that we're getting every day and the volume of people who are currently sick, the numbers right now are the highest they've ever been. The spike that we had around last year, around the holidays, was, I would argue, a more severe spike from a qualitative perspective because there were no vaccinations. But from a quantitative perspective, the spike we have now is higher than what we were dealing with the holidays last year. So the point I'm trying to make is that COVID's not over, and we're going to continue having direct expenses of county departments that are related to COVID. So getting a handle on that, if there's support on this board and as well as the Board of Supervisors to reimburse ourselves for those 2021 expenses, I think we would have to have some action on that in conjunction with closing the books on 2021. We don't want to close the books without that revenue being incorporated. So that, and I have other additional items, but that's just one of them on a list of about 10 that I have immediately in my mind.
Thank you. Ethan?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, a lot of thought has gone into this already. I think we have a fairly concise set of high-level priorities. It'll be a really good stepping off point for us to frame the conversation going forward. So I think if we can all sort of work together, offline on emailing back and forth, we can synthesize these recommendations or priorities from everyone and present something back to this committee for the next meeting, and then we can have a discussion about it at that point. So you have some homework to do.
Did you want to talk about the public engagement piece of it as well?
Yeah. So, obviously, as I said, some of the key considerations was, transparency and public engagement is really important to this. We already launched a survey, which got fairly good response rate of well over 1,000 residents responded to this. We have 64 pages of survey results, which we tried to boil down, and we got some really good information out of that survey. It wasn't a scientific survey, but we did learn a lot about some key themes that people were bringing up over and over again. So we're going to continue to use that document, which we've started to synthesize as one of our public engagement elements. Additionally, the next few meetings, we're going to be bringing in stakeholders. We've already identified a number of stakeholders, but we're going to need to continue to identify more stakeholders. These are people who have a unique perspective, point of view through their experience or their professional affiliation with some of the topics that have been brought up in pandemic-related issues, whether it's housing, family services, economic development, any of these related issues. So we're going to be inviting stakeholders in and having conversations with them to get a better idea of what the actual impacts of the pandemic have been on them. It'll be important for committee members to make suggestions of stakeholders, people that we should be talking to, people that we can't not hear. So again, I would encourage everyone to take a look at the list of stakeholders that the county administrator has already prepared and add to that. And I can circulate that for everyone's consideration, and I'll let you make additions to it. And again, we can discuss that at the next committee meeting.
I believe the stakeholders are outlined with the priorities in the back. A lot of
Correct.
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 But it's not an all-inclusive list.
Yeah, so we can, I think there's opportunities for additional stakeholders to be engaged with, and it can be as easy as, a one-on-one conversation, or it could be, a conversation in front of the full committee too. Additionally, we already have a website up. I'd like to make sure that we continue to maintain that with up-to-date information, agendas, meeting notes, links to the videos, and then allow residents to make sure that they can comment. And already that option is there. I know there's a comment box for the treasurer's office. It would be great if we can have the public continue to monitor our progress and then also provide feedback as we go. Shoot an email, send a comment for our consideration, so that no one feels that they're not being heard throughout this process. Just for the sake of transparency. So those are the key public engagement elements: the survey, the website, and stakeholder engagement. And I think, as we get closer to developing our priorities and list of projects and programs that are going to be recommended to the full board of supervisors, we should make sure that we're, publicizing our meetings and encouraging the public to, comment and weigh in on our deliberations. Does anyone have any ideas or comments on public engagement?
Anybody on Zoom?
At the risk of getting myself booted off again, can you hear me?
Yes.
Just on the public engagement piece, there was some suggestion about having input meetings at times other than 3:00 in the afternoon. So if we can get to that at some point, maybe not through our committee meetings, but eventually through the full board.
Thank you, Supervisor Bramer. I did also receive that feedback, and while these are not public hearings, each independently, these are working group meetings. I agree. We should have at least one or maybe more evening, but we're going to have to figure out when that would be convenient for the majority of the committee members. So thank you for reminding me of that.
Yeah, that is a good idea to have a accessible public meeting when we hit key milestones of the project.
Right. But maybe not too many of these, because this is a working group and we do have to convene when it's convenient for the majority. But thanks. So for those of you like me who need the bullet points, we're a conduit. We're not a decision-making committee. We're here to listen and we're here to distill. And it's not going to be a short process. We're hoping to wind this up in June. Not every meeting is going to be as short as this one, maybe, but your participation and your service to your community is greatly appreciated. And I want you to remember that this is an important process that we're undertaking, and we want to do it right, not just fast. So for next steps, we're going to be circulating the working notes and asking you for your feedback on the preliminary priorities, which will be just the guidelines that we're always going to have in the back of our heads as we're discussing the different proposals that'll come before us. We're going to ask you to come back or email or discuss amongst yourselves who other stakeholders might be that need to be involved in this process. We do have a beginning of a list. It is not exhaustive, and we are looking for as much input from our community as possible. So hopefully you guys will already be thinking of organizations or people you think need to be brought into this process to discuss what the needs of the community are. And finally, we're hoping for our next meeting that the treasurer will be willing to give a presentation on revenue recovery, which will be the first of the groupings that we're going to consider allocation to. Is that amenable to you in 2 weeks, Treasurer Swan?
Yes, it is.
Awesome. Thank you. Much appreciated. Does anybody in the room or on Zoom have any questions about anything we've covered today, the timeline, the process? Supervisor Wild?
As normally I do have a couple of comments. I'm just at first thinking about our presentation to the Board of Supervisors. And the first thing I'm thinking about is that we need to, or my suggestion would be to have some high level, not activities where we'll spend the money, but high level goals that we want to be able to use and measure all these different suggestions against and see how it fits against those goal priorities. And I think it's important. You know, I've only been on the Board of Supervisors for nearly 4 years, but I know it's not an easy slog to get things through. So the more that we can communicate to the full board and talk about these high level priorities, not the tasks, but go a few thousand feet above those. For example, you know, one of the things I was thinking about is what's been the major impact of COVID so far? What have been the major impacts that we've had? We've had people lose jobs. We've had business close. We've had loss of revenue. I'm sure we can go on and on. But when I approach a problem like this, I'd like to kind of start at the 50,000 feet and then dive down to see what works and what doesn't work. So it's just a suggestion, but I would like to see if we could come up with those real high level types of goals that we're trying to achieve and impacts that we're trying to resolve, so that when we go forward, again, we have a way to measure. Just a thought. Thank you.
Hopefully thank you. Hopefully that will come out as we discuss the preliminary priorities. But I also think that this is going to be an evolutionary or an evolving process. You know, we might start out with certain priorities, but as we hear from stakeholders, it might become clear to us that there are other things we hadn't thought of initially. So I'd like us to definitely have something in mind, but be a little bit more nimble on our feet with this. Thank you. Is there anybody else that has any observations or questions? Mr. Biddle?
Supervisor Hogan, thank you. You had mentioned that we're a conduit. So ultimately, who are the decision makers?
The Board of Supervisors.
Okay, great. Thank you. I didn't want to make that assumption, so thank
No,
you.
thank you for the clarification. Anybody else?
Can I add a few things?
Oh,
Okay, for the committee members, I just wanted to kind of explain the binder that everybody got. And I know it's got a lot of paperwork in it, and most of it, I don't expect most of you to know verbatim, but there will be a test at the next meeting, but no, I'm only kidding. The binder is broken down into the focus areas that we're going to have to decide upon funding allocations for, and those tabs are empty. So as we get information, I'd encourage you to put it in there. I have included in this the summaries that were provided by NACO, and I think their information is a very good synopsis of the program and what are eligible expenses and what are things maybe that we shouldn't consider too heavily. The next section is the federal guidance documents, and they're there really not for you to, as I said, go through in depth, but if there are implications, if somebody comes across with an idea, that's what we're going to refer to see if it can fit in the criteria. I mean, that's the actual guidance document. So that's more, I think, for Ethan and myself to kind of, and Ryan to be more familiar with, but they're there for a reference. And then the last section is our notes, staff-wise, County Administrator Moore's comments so far on the 64 pages of survey results that we all saw. So at some point, I believe everybody did get a copy of those survey results. And if you want, you can put them in the binder, or you can just keep them in the little 3-ring binder that you had that they came in. But one of the things to look at with those is what are the key things when you look through it that kind of jump out at you. And from a personal perspective, I'll say the things that jumped out at me were the number of people that cited mental health issues or concerns, childcare issues, and issue, kind of mobility and services for seniors. So those were things that when I kind of just quickly glanced through it, those were the things that jumped out at me. And I think that's what Ethan was alluding to is we would ask, and we'll send an email out asking for like the 3 or 5 things that really jump out at you from the survey results or from your own experiences that you think really kind of state what the impacts of the pandemic have been or what they may be. There's some things down the road that really may be developing that we, as Ryan alluded to, that, we have still yet to see. So just want to keep all that in mind. So that's what the binder is for. Again, it's not something that I expect everybody to know verbatim, but it's there as a reference document.
Thank you. Chairwoman Sieber.
Yes, thank you. I, again, wanted to just echo the sentiments that are here today about how, one, exciting it is for all of us to come together with this initiative, but how rare it is. That survey that Wayne refers to can also be found on our website. We have published the entire survey and the results unedited on our website. Nothing was filtered out. Everything is right there as they came in. And that survey was a great opportunity to take the temperature of our community and to find out what they were thinking as we all started to hear about the American Rescue Plan Act and what it meant to our counties and to our local governments as well. Some questions came up about where is this used in localities in our towns versus the city versus the county. So we've had a good opportunity to try to inform not only our members, but the public and hopefully this committee. There's an entire page on the website for that. And we'll continue to give updates to our community on what we're doing in responding to their questions and their concerns in that survey. First and foremost, we want them to know that we're listening. Also, as Ethan pointed out, there are multiple types of funding that we don't want to duplicate either. We've seen the opioid settlement gives us a great opportunity to provide some mental health resources. We've talked about the infrastructure bill that's coming down. We've talked about the broadband pots of money. And just to be aware that we can really make a dollar stretch very far with this. And we're all very good at doing that. But I also think that we need to be mindful that a lot of these dollars were provided to counties to respond in crisis, to recover from a pandemic, and to help our community, our individuals, our businesses, and our county government. And we have a ways to go here in Warren County. We have discovered a lot of areas where we can improve upon our response remotely. And we've improved, but but we can do better. And I think looking at some of the ways that we can utilize a small percentage of these funds to be ready to recover and to be ready to respond remotely when we must, it has to be an imperative priority of this group. And lastly, just to encourage the public to continue to engage with us, to continue to be here remotely, in person, wherever they're comfortable, and to continue to have a voice, because it's your money. We need to be really careful about this opportunity and utilize it, as you've heard here today, in a way that we can continue to reap the benefit to Warren County for years to come. So I know this is a long process and one that won't be an easy one, but I hope engaging the public as often and frequently and with that accessibility will provide us an incredible opportunity to make our county just a little bit stronger. So thank you again for your time, and for all of you for being here and taking us on.
Thank you, Chairwoman. Supervisor Bramer?
Thanks, Chairwoman Hogan. I wanted to put out there my thoughts about the overall use of the funds that are coming to the county, because I think that we still have, we do have other dollars coming to the county, like the infrastructure bill, but those dollars to me don't seem as clear. And I do agree that this money from the ARPA dollars is supposed to be used for our response to the crisis from the coronavirus pandemic. And I think that includes the ability, or not the ability, because there is no ability in some places right now. What I was going to say is enhancing the ability of people to work remotely, or to get to school remotely, or to talk to their doctors remotely. So that broadband piece to me is really important, as well as helping people with their mental health issues. Like Wayne said, that was something that came out in the survey results already. I mean, I know that we are going to need to stay open-minded about what our priorities may end up being, but I think that's a really important one, the mental health issues, and getting our workforce back to work. To me, as a mom who had kids not too long ago in childcare, that's really important, having safe, available, and affordable childcare. Otherwise, you're not going back to work. So if the county can provide those extra values through this money, that's what I think is really important, at least for right now. But I'll continue to stay open-minded, like I said, and I think that we should be hopefully leveraging that other money that we might be able to get, but we don't know what it is. So let's use what's already in the bucket. You know, we already have the $6 million. Let's get it to work as quickly as we can. But like you said, Andrea, carefully as well. We don't need to rush, but we should get the money out there working. Thank you.
Thank you, Supervisor Bramer. Supervisor Beatty?
Thank you, Supervisor Hogan. You know, so we have about 65,000 residents in Warren County. We're going to have about $12.4 million to spend. And if there's one thing that I believe in, it's a buy-in from the people who are going to be part of this process, which is 65,000 residents. So to me, whatever directions we go, whatever directions the Board of Supervisors go, communication all along the way is vital for them to have the trust in the process, and that the money is being spent as wisely and as economically feasible as possible. Otherwise, there'll be cynicism, there'll be, oh, you guys never communicate, so forth. So I guess the big question is, how do we communicate this whole process? Now, we've already talked about on the website, we've already talked about other means. Just throwing something out there, what if we send out periodic postcards with progress reports? I mean, is it costly? It's 15, 20 grand to send out to all the residents in the county. But the effect it has, I think, of getting them to feel like they're part of the process and buying into the whole ARPA plan is vital. You know, what I heard, you know, I went out, you know, we've gotten through the silly election season, but what I heard a lot was out there was they didn't know about the online survey and so forth. That's an easy way, you know, ignorance is not bliss. But I had a lot of people say, why didn't you send a postcard? Why didn't you just, they go, because postcards we read, not long papers, not this, but postcards we actually look at. And they, you know, especially colored postcards. So this, I'm just throwing this out there, but the key is going to be, can we keep these people engaged with the process? Whatever process that may be, and whatever direction we may take, so that they feel that, you know, some of these guys are on top of it. And I feel like we're getting the biggest bang for our dollar in this $12 million. And granted, 65,000 people may have 65,000 different ideas, but if they feel like they're being communicated with all along the way, they feel like they're part of it. And that's just kind of where I'm coming from here. So thank you.
Thank you, Supervisor Beatty. I love the idea of progress reports. I think that's great. I really do. We'll have to look at that. Does anybody else have any questions or input? Supervisor Wild?
Thank you very much. I do have one. I believe Glens Falls receives some ARPA money also. I'm not sure how much it is, but I think it's significant also. 11 million. Thank you. Does that restrict us from engaging with Glens Falls projects because they already have $11 million which to do the same thing?
No, hopefully we can leverage their 11 million against ours and go even further, right? We're gonna communicate with all of the communities, all the towns and the city throughout this process to find out how they too are utilizing their funds and see where there's opportunities for shared services or collaboration every bit of the way. But thank you. That's a good observation. Anybody else? Mr. Biddle?
Supervisor Hogan, thank you. If we could have somebody continually reach out to Congresswoman Stefanik, Senator Schumer, Senator Gillibrand. One of the things with the infrastructure bill, the preliminary numbers show that only 3% of the dollars that are going to New York are going to go to New York 21. That's our entire congressional district from Watertown to Glens Falls to Plattsburgh. The initial numbers through the infrastructure bill are not that strong for rural areas. So if somebody's comfortable reaching out to those folks on a continual basis so we can be updated as numbers come out, I think that that'll help our group tremendously because the numbers look big on the infrastructure. For our region, unfortunately, in that particular, they're not that strong.
Great, thank you. Thank you for the information and I think for volunteering.
My pleasure.
Anybody else? Administrator Moore?
Thank you. The version of my document that's in everybody's binder, I believe dates to, question is, do I have a date on it? I believe it dates to September 17th. And I have some updates to that document that I can get around to this group, and anything that's updated since September 17th is highlighted in green. I just wanted to make that note that I will get that out somehow to this entire group so that you're looking at my latest and greatest, if you will,
Thank you.
which may not be so great.
Thank you. Anybody else in the committee? All right. Yes, Chairwoman Sieber.
I'm sorry, just one last thing to Supervisor Wild's point about Glens Falls and other municipalities that have accepted and started to plan out how to use their ARPA funds, and maybe Supervisor Thomas or Supervisor Leggett, both of you having municipalities that you run day to day. I'm sure you've had discussions with your board or public and also ideas on how to utilize those dollars. And of course, Supervisor Hogan, you can lead the charge with that, but maybe there's a good way to just kind of gauge what other towns in our county are doing so that we don't duplicate and, like you said, kind of, lift off and partner with each other. I followed a little bit of what was going on in the city, but I'm sure Supervisor Bramer has a much better handle on, what's happening in Glens Falls with, how they're utilizing those dollars. But my guess is we're kind of in a rare position where we've taken this data in, kind of held back, and now taking a look at how can we, fill those gaps. And continue to build upon those relationships. So that might be a nice, quick comparative analysis to have a handle on.
We will. Thanks. Definitely. Right. Yeah. We do have to look for opportunities here as well for collaboration, because as you said, you know, when you look at the scope of all the need, it's not a lot of money. So, anybody else? To that, I'd like to end each of our meetings by acknowledging the members of the public that have taken the time to come and be here, and ask them if they have any input. So, hi. Would you guys like to weigh in?
Surprised $12 million, I figured this place would be full of people. Ladies first.
Do they use the?
Come up to the-
Hi, good afternoon. I'm Kim Sobjeck, Executive Director with Family Service Association. I attended today just to get kind of an ear to the ground of what the process was. Our agency, as you may know, have just celebrated 111 years in the community. So we've seen a lot of challenges that have faced the residents of Warren County as well as the surrounding counties. And I think this pandemic has definitely been on the top of the list. So just a couple comments I'd like to make of what we heard with some of the priorities. Just thinking with daycare, I think just to go a step further, not just to fund that, but to maybe even look at how to get it to be more available, how to attract daycare providers. The same thing with, it can go with bus drivers, it can go with truck drivers, it can go with plowers, anybody that's helping take care of the roads and the infrastructure of the county. It's more than just paying somebody, it's finding the people. And just from the clients that I work with, they really have no idea those opportunities are out there. So maybe finding a way to bridge into the people who might need employment and long-term employment the most, educate them to maybe fill some of those vacancies. That was just one thought. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
John Carr, Lake George, thank you for giving the public that chance. I was mainly coming just to kind of catch up on where you guys were going with it as a big topic. Looking at the requirements of this money, looking at the additional money that's coming in to the county, for things like, broadband, et cetera. I think it's an opportunity for the county and the towns that are also receiving money to take a step back and focus. I think this money is really for healthcare and what it means to different people in our community. Currently, Lake George, just went through a contentious, if you will, passing of ambulance and EMS funding. And thinking about that in the light of this money coming into the county and the money that does come into the towns, but also I agree, there was a lot of comments about mental health in this that kind of surprised me. I guess, how do you fix all those problems with $12 million and with additional funds from that? The county's done some studies on EMS services. If you really think about it, you divide 65,000 people into $12 million, you get a couple $100 each. It's not a lot of money if you divide it out that way, but if you put it into something that could be a long-term investment, and really take the county, and there are cities that are much larger than 65,000 people and really treat us as one entity. Currently, our EMS network is very fragmented and made up of first-line responders who are often volunteers to some paid people in between. And how that gets funded is dysfunctional at best right now. And even what the town of Lake George is trying to do is dysfunctional. And puts an unfair burden on a few people, not the whole mass, and not the tourists necessarily that are coming in. I also think our police department, the sheriff's office does deal with a lot of mental health issues, and especially with stuff like this. I think as our population ages, ambulance services will become more critical. And I think it's an opportunity to take money. And I don't agree. I don't disagree. We can reimburse people for stuff they've spent over the last year. I've spent money in my business on stuff. That's fine. But I think 5 years from now, what I hope this committee takes away is 5 years from now, do we have a better healthcare system for the residents of this community for the next pandemic? And who are those people? How are they getting paid? Is it coming from property taxes, sales tax, federal funding? What's funding those people to actually do those jobs? I think with the $12 million, this is an opportunity to jumpstart an EMS program on a countywide basis. You know, whether it's a tragedy on the lake that requires 30 ambulances or the balloon festival, we need resources we can move around. Sometimes those may be mental health calls that our sheriff's department we're currently funding, and the sheriff's department is taking those calls. Would it be better to have a countywide EMS program that has specialists that can help with those needs that flare up? And it might be in a small town. You know, a lot of the supervisors in this room represent small towns that don't necessarily have the financial resources to just pound down on a full-time EMS. Town of Lake George, despite budget numbers, it's going to cost about $1 million. There's 3,800 people that live there. Wow, that's a lot of money for 3,800 people. Is this really a practical way to go about doing this on a long-term thing? So I would encourage you guys to, you know, show us as residents something 5 years from now that we can point back and say, we're ready for the next pandemic. Thank you guys for all the time you take, even if it is at 3 in the afternoon. So appreciate it.
Thank you. Don, is there anybody on YouTube?
Hi, Chairwoman Hogan. There's no comment on YouTube at this point.
Thank you. So with that, I'll send you home with your homework. Come back with some ideas for priorities, stakeholders. Do a little bit of reading in your spare time on what the funds can be used for and cannot be used for. And we will reconvene in 2 weeks with a presentation from Treasurer Swan. Thank you.